Hello.
Hello.
That's right. It is YouTube time this time, all the time.
If you like poetry, if you like literature, if you like cultural history, then you've come to the right place. We make podcasts about all of those things. So be sure to like and share this video. And of course, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you never miss an upload.
Since we mostly make podcasts, you can also find our shows on all the major podcast platforms. So if you found this video, but YouTube isn't your speed for regular podcast listening, head over to Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe there.
All right. Hope you enjoy the episode.
Hello and welcome to Close Talking, the world's most popular poetry analysis podcast from Cardboard Box Productions Incorporated. I am co-host Jack Rossiter Munley.
And I am your other co-host, Connor McNamara Stratton.
And together we read a poem,
talk about the poem,
and read the poem again.
Before we get into today's selection, a quick note that if you like what we do here at Close Talking and have a spare moment, it would mean the world to us if you drop a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
Those reviews help boost us up the algorithm and are a great way for us to find new listeners.
If you want to get in touch with us, you can find us on so many different social medias.
On Twitter, the show is at Close Talking. I am at Jack Rossiter Munn, and Connor is at Connor M. Stratton.
On Instagram, the show is at Close Talking Poetry. And on Facebook, it's facebook.com/Close Talking.
We also have a whole website just for the podcast. It is closetalking.com, where you can find all the past episodes of the show. And Cardboard Box Productions has a newsletter, Unboxed. So if you go to cardboardboxproductionsinc.com, you can subscribe for more behind-the-scenes stuff on Close Talking and on all the literary and cultural history podcasts that Cardboard Box Productions makes.
All right, on with the show.
Hello, and welcome to another all-new episode of Close Talking. I am one of your co-hosts, Jack Rossiter Munley.
And I am your other co-host, Connor McNamara Stratton.
And today, because it's such a big topic and it's so integral to the entirety of haiku, we're continuing Haiku Week. Welcome to day 6. We're going to continue our conversation about translation. Quickly, before we jump back into our conversation on translation, I just want to say if you're enjoying this special series on haiku, or if you enjoy any of our regular episodes in our usual read the poem, talk about the poem, read the poem again format, it would mean the world to us if you would hop over to the iTunes Store, or Apple Podcasts as it's called, and leave us a rating and review. Those ratings and reviews are the best way to help us find more listeners. So if you like what we're doing here, it would mean a lot to us if you would leave us a rating and a review. For the first part of our conversation on translation and our discussion of this Basho poem, hop back and listen to Haiku Week episode 5. Just to set the stage, here are a variety of translations of the haiku that we're discussing. And we'll include them again at the end of the episode, too.
Old pond, frogs jumping in, sound of water. Lafcadio Hearn.
The old pond. A frog jumps in. Plop. R.H. Blythe.
An old pond. A frog jumps in the water, the sound. Hiroki Sato.
Breaking the silence of an ancient pond, a frog jumped into water. A deep resonance.
One other interesting bit of context, and this is something that I didn't know, is that this haiku was actually the hoku, the first haiku of a renga. It's interesting because I feel like it's one of those, it's become so iconic. It has all this pressure to be like, this is the ultimate haiku. And then it makes people very upset because they're like, well, it's just describing a frog jumping into a pond. and I haven't achieved immediate enlightenment. And when I read that it was sort of part of a renga, it was a way for me to take off some of that pressure, I think, and also give me more context into what it might be meaning. So if we remember what a renga is, the first one is the guest, but actually in this situation, Basho is apparently the host. I don't know. I don't understand. And he led off. And so as the host, he sort of self-deprecates himself. So one way to read it, and this is sort of how Sato provides a reading of it in his book, an old pond, a frog jumps in the water, the sound. He's like, I invite you over to my party. You're supposed to be having a good time, and all I can give you is like the sound of a frog jumping into a pond. So it's actually a kind of like, this is all I got, rather than this is pure Zen. And then the waki, which was by Enomoto Kikaku, suspended over young rush blades, a spider's web, which I love. I feel like that's beautiful. And if we think about the guest as doing a praise poem, he's sort of responding to Basho saying, all I have is a frog in a pond. And he's saying, no, this is like, there's real beauty in this stillness and in this quiet. What great silence you've given us. Suspended over young rush blades, a spider's web. One way of thinking about it. And in that context, we may not like the plop that much or the deep resonance that much. At the same time, yeah, there's something. It's like it's clearly not just self-deprecating. So the kind of the translation, an old pond, a frog jumps in the water, the sound, that preserves some ambiguity, perhaps.
I think it's also, you can point out that it's a translator or editor's choice to remove this haiku from the renga and to put it in a collection of just Basho's work, as opposed to viewing the whole renga. And I don't know if it was preserved. I don't really know the provenance of this particular renga, but to remove it from the context of the waki also changes its meaning, as we've been discussing. Like it's a very different feeling than this sort of self-deprecating feeling when it's completely on its own. I also have to admit, I'm a little partial to the plop, not necessarily as something that really works in the poem, but again, when a translator sees the sound of water and thinks, oh, what if I made that onomatopoetic? That's like a neat piece of creativity on the translator's part. And I, in reading that, am thinking more about the creativity of the translator than getting more meaning out of the poem. So it's a different appreciation, but I appreciate it as like interesting thought, R.H. Blythe. Doesn't necessarily work super well for me, but I kind of like that you thought of it.
I like that too. And it brings in, one thing that I think has unfairly sort of been put upon haiku is that it's seen as very serious and like Zen-like, and profound, which it often is, but it's also often very playful. I mean, we've talked about Issa, who's quite playful all the time in his "Don't worry, spiders. I keep house casually. All the time I pray to Buddha. I keep on killing mosquitoes." He has just another one because I love his stuff. At the Imperial Inn, a snail acts as if it were all his. At lightning, a toad gives himself a pat on the head.
I think he would be fun to meet and hang out with.
Yes.
He just seems like a cool guy who's got a pretty good line on life.
I know. Yeah, no, he's so good. And I learned that actually he's one of the first people apparently to like sort of record his like personal feelings and sort of keep a record of that stuff down. And he also wrote like a lot of haiku,
He
like
did. Super prolific.
like 20,000, I think maybe.
Yeah.
Or,
It's amazing.
and just for reference, Issa was sort of lived in the late 1700s and early 1800s. So he was like, I guess, like 100 years after Basho. Okay, there's one more that I really like. Letting the lake wind blow on his ass, a cicada chirps. Which is great. And apparently cicadas, like when they lay their eggs or they do something, they kind of squat on the river or the water. So it's actually a quite clinically accurate haiku and not funny at all.
Yeah, it's just science. And science is never funny. So get it together. Get your minds out of the gutter, poetry people. Jeez.
Exactly. Just bringing it back to the Basho, the one thing that the plop does do is it introduces that kind of levity or that playfulness into the haiku, in stark contrast to the deep resonance. So I appreciate it for that. Old pond, frogs jumping in, sound of water. Lafcadio Hearn.
The old pond. A frog jumps in. Plop. R.H. Blythe.
An old pond. A frog jumps in the water, the sound. Hiroki Sato.
Breaking the silence of an ancient pond, a frog jumped into water, a deep resonance. Yuasa Nobuyuki.
And this last one that I like is translated by Robert Haas. The old pond, a frog jumps in, sound of water.
I like that one a lot too. Hey everybody, this is Jack. As you heard earlier in this episode, and a little bit all throughout Haiku Week, we've been discussing the Renga, the linked verse form from which haiku evolved, and Connor and I have been writing a Haiku Week Renga back and forth, adding to it every day, so here is the Day 6 updated version of our Haiku Week Renga.
Spotting Brooklyn blossoms from the plains, a snowless white as snow.
The air is cold with pine. Or is it juniper? And does it matter?
A raven pines for the needle to move on the sun's seething hot reply.
A long walk and a quick stop. Cold chocolate spring.
No one else likes sweet tang, chocolate chips, orange sherbet, solitude.
The man on the train says Romulus killed his brother. A long way from 6 a.m.
All roads lead to Lupin was a memoir I never wrote. Or maybe fanfic.
Spelly arms and fried stupid. I'm witched into stunning, wizarded a world away.
Certain alphabets bake dry in the oven without oil or legs.
I etch my displeasure 1 minute at a time.
Little things are never secondary, as pollen dust speckles the wasp.
The park is farther when the wind stops. 6-string solace.
Hey, thanks for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode, head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review. Those reviews help us with the algorithm and are the best way for us to find new listeners.
Do you have thoughts about this poem? Or is there a poem or poet you'd like us to cover on a future episode? We would love to hear from you, and there are tons of ways to get in touch.
Yes, you can send us an email to closetalkingpoetry@gmail.com or find us on Twitter. I'm at Jack Rossiter Munn, Connor is at Connor M. Stratton, and the show is at Close Talking.
On Instagram, we are at Close Talking Poetry, and we are on Facebook at facebook.com/Close Talking.
And speaking of all of those many and varied social media platforms, a very special thank you to our incredible social media manager, Corey Chena.
Woo woo!
Woo.
Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time. Come back again.
Please come back just one more time.
Door's always open. Okay, bye.
See ya.